Hello! Welcome to Pint of a Story with me, Shobit. In this podcast, we bring you pint-sized stories from indie authors such as myself that you are likely not to have read before. Links to where the stories live on the internet will be in the show notes or description, and we do encourage you to click on them and read the stories for yourself. Hope you enjoyed today's story, and if you do, please share it around and subscribe if you like. Tales of grandeur, immoral and pure, greed and secrets, passion and glory. The pulse is rising, the plot's surprising, you're captivated, that's the point of the story. Yes, that really is the point of a story, and this week's story is called The Penitentiary, written by Guncha Gupta and first published in April 2020 on penmancy.com. Penmancy.com is a website we deeply care about as they share the same passion as us, which is to provide indie stories a platform to reach as many people as possible. To read this story and many more, please visit penmancy.com. Your feedback or comments really matter, so please leave some. And hope you like this one. Here goes. The federal police tried best to let the two detectives collect samples and take photographs while keeping the crowd at bay. But the way the dead body was laid out on the ground was eerily intriguing, and no one could blame the curiosity of the onlookers gathering around it. The victim's head lay strangely twisted, a pool of blood forming a halo, his arms outstretched opposite to each other, left leg fully extended, right leg slightly flexed at the knee, its sole touching the left ankle at the medial malleolus, creating an impression of a man on a crucifix, now lying inside the rectangle of yellow duct tapes pasted around to designate the site of the mishap. The cell was 6 feet by 8, with a well-scrubbed, spotlessly clean floor. The dry smell of recently used antiseptic hung in the air. The walls were painted sky blue, and a starched bedsheet of the same color stretched out on a metal stretcher, making a bed that was meant to soothe the troubled inmates. The man squatting on the edge of the bed appeared bored and disinterested, his eyes dull, expressionless. His skin, pale yellow. The unruly mop of hair on his head was partly white, but mostly grey. Though in his early 40s, he looked older. He hadn't left his cell for 3 days in a row, and no amount of coaxing would bring him out of his den. The warden, his hands full with the new lot that came in 4 days back, thought it better to leave the inmate staying in and out of trouble rather than outside, and asked the staff to let him be. A sudden movement caught the man's eye, who shifted his gaze to the old fig tree in the courtyard outside his window. There was renewed interest in his eyes as he saw a fringe-lipped bat hanging upside down, legs clinging onto a ripe fig, with its teeth firmly inside the fruit, attacking it, sucking out the pulp while rotating as he dangled. The dancing of the bat continued, and the man in the bed sat starstruck, unable to peel his eyes off this visual. Quite suddenly, the bat stopped moving. The pulp sucked out, the fruit left hollow, its wings relaxed, outstretched. One leg extended, the other flexed with its toes opposing the extended angle, almost in a crucifix. The corners of the man's lips twisted, his senses heightened, raggedly breathing. Saliva trickled down the side of his mouth. His gaze shifted a bit and fell on Farheen, the albino adolescent who had papery thin white skin and gentle colorless eyes, sitting in the courtyard some distance away. lustily gazing at the tortuous prominent green veins on Farheen's neck. The man, no longer inert, ran out of his room towards the courtyard. But halfway there, his gait faltered. Maria, the nurse, was entering the ward, wheeling in the medicine cart. She saw him as he came to a halt. "David, is everything all right? Oh, do you need something?" Her voice gentle and cajoling. Maria cared about David. David, with his countenance changed abruptly, bent his head and started walking over slowly with a slight limp, as innocent as a puppy. David liked it when Maria treated him tenderly, almost like a child. He moved his head from side to side in denial. Maria tried again. "Would you like to go out for a bit? Breathe in the fresh air? God knows when you left your cell last." This time David nodded in the affirmative, and Maria, breathing a sigh of relief, helped him outside. With Maria gone, David secretly opened his fist, in which lay a roll of duct tape. Farheen had left. A silent observer sitting under the chestnut tree on the other side of the courtyard witnessed the entire course of events. Disturbed, making a mental note to discuss the case with Dr. Jonathan. The penitentiary had medium-level security with cell housing for inmates. Dr. Clare was relatively new to the facility and was Dr. Jonathan's junior. She had read David's file and knew him to be suffering from schizophrenia. She also knew him to be a kleptomaniac. It would be a while before she could know all her patients, but she had special interest in David's case. He seemed to be a recluse, yet she had that uncanny feeling about him, as if he pretended boredom. She had caught him looking at her with eyes that were anything but expressionless. But with schizophrenia, she never knew. Dr. Clare returned to her cabin and sifted through the folders in a computer, going through histories, diagnoses, and treatments of the inmates. She came across a newspaper clipping, dated roughly 2 years prior, where a young boy committed suicide by falling from the 12th floor of a housing complex near the penitentiary. Intrigued by the partially yellowed, dull-looking picture accompanying the article, she started reading. She discovered that the boy's case, although closed as a suicide, had certain irregularities which the police could not explain. The way the body was placed when it fell on the ground, and also the lack of excessive bleeding, suggested ante-mortem death followed by fall. But forensics found intrapleural blood was thought to be post-mortem rather than ante-mortem, and along with Dr. Jonathan's supporting testimony to the boy's mentally disturbed state, the case was closed as a suicide. For the second time that day, Dr. Clare felt anxious. But it was time for her rounds. Dr. Jonathan would be waiting for her. The rounds were a great learning experience, and Claire enjoyed them thoroughly, enamored by Dr. Jonathan's vast knowledge of the subject. After the rounds, she sat down again to read the files of the inmates. Andy was a case of bipolar manic depressive disorder, well controlled with medication and due for release very soon. Dr. Clare made notes where she felt necessary. A knock on the door made her look up from her files, and she saw Dr. Jonathan enter the room. "Hey, Doc. Anything bothering you? You looked gloomy during rounds today." She paused a tad longer than normal, but Dr. Jonathan, being the amazing psychiatrist he was, caught on to the cap. "Oh, out with it, Claire," he smiled gently and coaxed her. She proceeded to tell him her doubts about David. Dr. Jonathan noticed that the door was a little ajar, and he saw Maria in the corridor. He waved a greeting to her before shutting the door. "Yes, I see you noticed it too. I have been studying this case for some months now. The man seems intelligent to me when he lets his guard down, but such instances are momentary and it's difficult to record them. Anyway, we can both try and study him from now on. I shall share my observations about him with you, but please remember they are confidential." Feeling a little unburdened, Dr. Clare started working on her other cases. The night guard brought her the sealed observation file that Dr. Jonathan had sent to her, and it was past midnight when she finally left the premises. The fire drill required everyone to evacuate their cells. The inmates were mostly indifferent to the drill, performing it almost like a routine exercise. They would be stripped, gathered into units, and counted. This meant human contact, sometimes pesky questions, and unwanted friendliness. David hated this. But during the chaos of the ringing of the fire alarm and everyone gathering outside the gate, he would pick up stuff from the ERT cart, the emergency response team, that is. Small stuff, like pieces of gauze, plastic syringes, latex glove, yes, one at a time. Things that were of no use to him, but he would enjoy tricking the ERTs. This time he tricked the security guard, cleverly picking his black cylindrical laser tag gun. Before the line moved in for stripping and checking, he'd cleverly hidden the tag gun in a deep hole in the sidewall and covered it with a brick. Nobody found his stash there, ever, because nobody knew his secret hiding place. The trick was in the two loose bricks covering the tiny alcove. One could be removed from the inside, from the common residential area, and the other from outside the gate in the courtyard. These little distractions were the highlights in David's stay here. At times other than these, he remained reclusive, expressionless and aloof. As night fell, the inmates were all securely locked in. The headaches had been troubling him for almost a year now. They were an omen for forthcoming hallucinations. Hallucinations he'd been trying to ignore, to fight back. They became stronger with each attack. The voices in his head beckoned him to break open the metal door of his cell. But it was no use. The security at night was really tight, and there was no way to break the lock. That night, the voices grew stronger than before. They seemed to be echoing, reverberating all around him. The voices pounded in his head, and he felt like his eardrums would burst. Saliva started trickling from the side of his mouth. The voices took a shape. He saw Dr. Claire. Farine? Farine was mocking him, shouting in his ear. David closed his ears with his palms, trying to keep the noise away. Then he saw Dr. Jonathan coming at him, syringe in hand, a sinister smile, ready to puncture his arm and drug him. The voices became one. They were asking him to break down the door. He saw Maria. Sweet Maria. She handed him the key. She wanted him to escape. Imagination and reality were becoming difficult to separate. He opened the cell door and walked briskly out as if guided by the devil. He reached his alcove, robotically removed the brick, and peeked furtively. The laser tag gun was gone. He turned back and thought he saw someone coming out of Dr. Jonathan's room. Quickly he hid behind the deserted counter. Was it Maria? He let her pass before returning to his cell. The self-lock clicked right in. He fell asleep. The next morning there was chaos in the penitentiary. There were police and jacketed federal detectives crawling all over the place. Claire showed her identity card and entered the clinical space only to let out a scream. Dr. Jonathan's door stood wide open. On the desktop lay his lifeless form, his head strangely twisted, a pool of blood forming a halo. His arms outstretched, opposite to each other. Left leg fully extended, right leg slightly flexed at the knee, its sole touching the left ankle at the medial malleolus, creating an impression of a man on a crucifix. A cylindrical black laser tag gun lying on the floor near his head. The detective was pointing at the wound on the head and said that the head had been smashed in with the laser gun. Claire could not believe what she saw. How in the name of God could this be? She was inconsolable. The chief detective led her out towards the warden's room. "Drink?" he asked, pouring a stiff one for himself. Claire nodded. The chief poured her a drink and made to leave, but was stopped mid-stride. "David!" "Yes?" the chief asked. "David!" Claire repeated. "What of him?" "Check him. It ought to have been him. We were discussing him last night. Dr. Joe—" She stifled a cry and continued. "Jonathan and I. We suspected him to be nowhere near as troubled as his lawyer's plea would have you believe. Or you could say Dr. J was having second thoughts about his assessment." Sudden appreciation dawned on the chief's eyes, and he made to shut the door. A pretty woman in a nurse's uniform and a medicine tray greeted him outside the door in the corridor. The chief returned her greeting and was soon listening to Dr. Clare's theory. Outside in the corridor, Maria smiled, her lips twisted in a sinister curl. She felt victorious. Her mission seemed accomplished. How hard had the last 2 years been? She had no time for mourning. She had so much to do, planning, plotting, executing, while always burning inside. Nightmares filled her dreams. Her son, her precious, precious son, who they said committed suicide, who Dr. Jonathan said in his report was suicidal. How could he, the callous doctor? Her precious son with a little psychiatric problem. First they put him in the penitentiary and then they messed with his brain, giving him injections and medicines, then releasing him, saying that he had been cured. Till he died. Till he was murdered. Had she not seen Dr. Jonathan drink till the wee hours just the night before his report was submitted? How negligent of him. Now she had had her revenge. Yes, she had planned it all. He would die just the way her son did. No one would suspect her. David, yes, David, would be the scapegoat. David, that sinister soul of the devil, he would take the fall. Yes, she knew all about him. He was no schizophrenic. She worked with these patients day in and day out. She knew who was troubled and who was pretending. This would be like killing 2 birds with 1 stone. A handcuffed David gave Maria a flat, expressionless stare. So, we hope you liked that story enough to tempt you to subscribe. We encourage you to share it with anyone else you can think of that would like to hear our stories as well. But do not forget, it is the writers that make the stories, so please read them for yourself by clicking the link in the description. That'll mean the world to us. Thank you for your time, and we hope to see you with our next. In the meantime, remember, if you can't find what you're looking for, create it. Take care.